Hey everybody, what is going on? I am Maximus Rex and this is Big Baby Reviews. Check out my comics, Big Baby and Star Crasher at KINGCOMICS.CA. Check out other videos on my YouTube channel, King Comics 2021. Check out my Instagram, MaximusRex13, and my Facebook, MaxRex and or Big Baby. Today is Friday, guys. Hope you've got a great weekend planned for yourselves. It is Todd McFarlane Day and we're looking at Spawn issue 11, cover dated June 1993. So, we're going to start off by mentioning this is the last issue of those 4 issues early on in the Spawn run. What I guess we could kind of, cleverly call the writer's block. I'm kidding. Maybe Tom McFarlane had some writer's block. That's why he paid these guys to write these stories. I'm kidding. We all know he used these writers that were known at the time, at least 3 of the 4 of them. I still contend that Dave Sim is kind of a weird choice. I think it's more because they were buddies, but there's that spirit of independent comics as well that Dave Sim represents, and I think that's why Todd brought him in for Spawn number 10. But yeah, so the hottest kind of writers of mainstream published comics at the time came in and wrote for Tom McFarlane on Spawn. So we had Alan Moore issue 8, Neil Gaiman in issue 9, and now we've got Frank Miller issue 11. I think this might be my first Frank Miller comic ever. And I gotta say, even thinking back to when I was a kid, as I was reviewing and reading through this issue for the review, rather, I remembered that I really wasn't that impressed by this issue. And I think that's normal. Anyone, even who's read Frank Miller before, I think would not be particularly impressed by this issue here. But yeah, there's just something just lackluster about it. There's this weird kind of side to Frank Miller in some of his work. I don't know exactly how to describe it when he gets satirical or it veers more into humor and parody and stuff. I'm maybe not so much on board with. And I feel like some of this issue represents that. I remember years later finding out that Frank Miller had written RoboCop 2, right? And I remember as a kid, I really loved it. Kind of traumatized me, but I really loved that first RoboCop movie. Still do to this day, and I can watch it, a couple of times a year because it's just such a great movie. But not so with RoboCop 2, because I remember when I saw it as a kid, before knowing about all these comic book things and that Frank Miller wrote it, I just saw that movie and I was like, man, this is kind of weird. There's a funny tone that I'm not quite sure I'm enjoying, and I know from reading later on issues like this and some later Frank Miller stuff that's Frank Miller's kind of vibe when it comes to the humor. So it's kind of off-putting, and I found this issue off-putting. Fortunately, as a kid, I did eventually go to Sin City first, I think. I got the first trade paperback way back in the day of Marv, his first story. I forget exactly what it's called, the title of it. And that was retro created, right? That title. It didn't have it originally. Is it A Dame to Kill For? Maybe. No. Anyways, the very first Dark Horse thing he did with the character Marv. And then later on Dark Knight Returns and all kind of the classic stuff, the Daredevil stuff. So that's the good stuff, I would say, for Frank Miller. That's his heightened kind of period, early 80s to about early 90s, I guess. About the decade. The 80s is really where Frank Miller shined. Elektra Lives Again, all that stuff. Oh, and we'll talk about the cover real quick. Fun enough cover. I want to mention, I didn't know this as a kid, but now I do. I know who Kiko and Rude are. They're 2 colorists. So Kiko eventually moved on, if you know a little bit about this, and colored a lot of Rob Liefeld stuff. And I'm pretty sure this is Ruben Rude, who's kind of like started off with Steve Oliff. So at this point, I guess Steve Oliff not coloring everything, handing off this cover to those guys. And the telltale signs, I think the Kiko thing is these clouds in the background. Now, this is early, whatever, maybe not even Photoshop. I don't know exactly quite what he was using there. But that's some interesting 90s coloring for sure in the background for those clouds. That is not Todd McFarlane. Todd McFarlane kind of drew all these foreground elements and I guess left that to the colorist. Yeah, so again, it kind of does stand out a little bit and looks a little odd, but still kind of works. It's 90s. So this one's dedicated to Jill Kane's story, Frank Miller, art Tom McFarlane, letters and editor Tom Orzechowski. So after Spawn's trip at the end of issue 9 into issue 10 and being in parallel dimensions and stuff, boom, he's back on Earth is basically what's happening here. Talking about a talking aardvark, right? He's smoked. And of course he's talking about Cerebus. Ugh, I'll never get that right. But back to the good old alleyways here, right? Back to his hobo buddies. Back to where Spawn is going to spend close to 100 issues, I think. I guess I'll find out as I go through the run exactly when Spawn, or if Spawn stops hanging around alleyways. But yeah, so here's where something happens, some explosion. Geez, what a boom, right? So Spawn runs to find out what's going on. The Spawn face here I always thought was kind of odd. Like it's almost like this drawing has a manga feel or a Walt Simonson feel. Like it just doesn't seem typically McFarlane. The anatomy and the rendering, yes, but there's just something, just I don't know how to describe it. Something Walt Simonson-ish. All right, so Spawn only to find out that some girl's been kind of blown to bits here by some sort of super weapon, it seems like. Spawn gets hit as well, right? And basically what we realize is there's some sort of turf war going on between two rival gangs who've got like some super heavy ordnance, right? Big guns, big 90s image guns. This guy's called Boomer, I guess. He's got to walk around with his name on his forehead. Yeah. Cool shot of Spawn. Bringing back the hole in the chest trope. And I've talked before, right, about how starting with about issue 9, when the paper gets glossy, you see like how Spawn now, the highlights they've moved from kind of a grayish tones to like a blue, right? Almost like Batman, like how they, color the highlights in Batman comics. And for Spawn, I don't like it. I'm just wondering if the interior colors, it's Steve Oliff and Ruben Rude, all right, so it's the regular guys, but all of a sudden McFarlane's maybe not throwing in as much shadow on the body and stuff, but they're choosing to use a blue instead of what they used to use was more of a gray. And it just, it's way too bright and colorful for Spawn. I just don't find it works. And it's in around, like I said, issue 9, 10, here where it's more obvious. Kind of all the way through to when McFarlane actually stops drawing Spawn, which is, I think, issue 24. We're getting close to it, actually. This is issue 11. So, yeah, we've only got about another 10 to 12 issues of McFarlane drawing Spawn. That's it. We're going to review McFarlane's last published full comic, which is an issue of Spawn, right? He's done illustrations since then, but never a full comic. All right, so obviously Spawn heals up that hole there. Precious energy spent. Yeah, and that Spawn logo's counting down how much energy is going to disappear eventually. So kind of sucks to establish something that's so prominent and then just kind of have it go by the wayside. But what are you going to do? I feel like McFarlane's taking inspiration from like Larson a little bit with the buildings here. So with the rendering and just the quickness of some of the inking and stuff. Looks kind of Larson-esque. And even there's something about the inking here. It's just a little bit different, It is probably still Tom McFarlane, but he's definitely taking a different approach here, which I kind of like. This kind of extreme lighting at the bottom here with the dark shadows. See where like they're using kind of a gray here rather than a blue, which I think works better on Spawn. Like the gray here, like, right, if they had done this blue as they're doing it here, wouldn't work at all, right? They might have even tried it and switched it back, because even here, like, it just it makes Spawn instantly less of a horror character and more of a superhero, right? Like, it's just too kind of bright and colorful for Spawn. This shot of Spawn kind of, it almost seems like the cape is kind of propelling him around. It's not literally flying. Maybe he's gliding a bit, and then like the ends of the cape grabbing the building and stuff. That's just me hypothesizing. Here's the ultimate McFarlane, color hold shadow thing that he always tries to do, right? It kind of works here. It kind of looks cool, to be honest. There's some wild colors in just this panel here, if you think about it, right? You got some kind of reddish browns down here, some light greens, all throughout here, some dark green, and just a lot of blue here for the cape. Like, wow, that is not at all Spawn's colors, right? But they certainly work and look really cool, to be honest. Nice change. They kind of tried the same thing down here, right? Or a similar approach. Just a spot of color. This whole thing, this is Byron, like that Frank Miller vibe. That's why I didn't like as a kid. I'm like, why is it? I feel like this isn't taking Spawn seriously. As a kid, maybe I was taking it way too seriously, but I just felt like Frank Miller was taking the piss out of Spawn a little bit in this comic. And I mean, what you'll see also plot wise, like kind of the wrap up is pretty weak as well when we get to it. But I mean, the artwork is great. We got some good. This is like still I would consider peak McFarlane for me, anyways. Right? I always say peak McFarlane is those, maybe last few issues of Amazing Spider-Man, but not even. I felt he got better from Amazing Spider-Man when he took a break and then started again on the Spider-Man series. Right? I felt he got better in that break. Excuse me. And it's continuing here. He's still meeting the deadlines. He's still doing some impressive artwork, finding shortcuts here and there, sure, but I think the overall consistency of the art is pretty darn good, right? Still getting that McFarlane, what we want from McFarlane, right? The crazy kind of rendering, some pretty cool action all throughout this sequence here, right? And this is, I think, what is most important in this issue, and what we mostly remember is this, first time I saw this, and I'm like, Jeff Darrow, or Geoff, I thought his name was Geoff Darrow. Thought for sure he was actually European, right? Because I'd been exposed to European comics as a kid, living in a French province, having access to more French comic book material. And, this to me, even back then, I could tell just had such a European flavor and a European vibe, and a European aesthetic and approach, right? This style, I don't think is so heavily used, not at this point, at least in the early 90s, in the American market because of this idea of deadlines and stuff. In Europe, the way they produce is a bit different, and most artists over there, they do like a 40-odd page album per year. Most times they do everything. They do the lettering, they do the coloring, or sometimes there's partnerships, of course, like over here, but they just get a lot more leeway and time to do their stuff, and that's why usually it's a little more intricate as well, right? And this is definitely an example of something that's extremely intricate. So as a kid, just assume that he was European, only to find out he's American, but very heavily influenced by American comics, but also by Japanese comics and manga. So I mean, the level of detail is just insane, right? It's crazy. He said in interviews he just never really learned, or he claims like he's not good at shading. So he just figured out, okay, well, if I want to get good at this, I just have to draw every little thing and leave any kind of shading to the color, right? So he has to draw everything. He can't hide anything in shadow, basically, in any of his art. That's pretty intense. Funny little detail, too, I always thought and liked even as a kid, was the fact that, of course, why would Spawn have pointy, if the costume covers his body well, the fact that you can see his toes here, I think is pretty funny. And I mean, Spawn is like, back then it was kind of a shock as well to see this pinup, and every pinup of Spawn you've seen, it's a close-up shot of Spawn. He's the focus, right? And in this, he's not even 1/4 of the page, or barely, you know what I mean? More of the focus, I would say, is on this hulking Geoff Darrow creation here. And of course, the fact that he's using very European style cars, Citroën right here, Citroën as some people say, but it's a French word, Citroën. These are all very Europe inspired cars, right? So yeah, it definitely lends itself to that vibe. Next issue, Rob Liefeld's Blood Wolf. Great. So more shots of Spawn here again, where I'm going to point out just how much this blue just ruins Spawn as a dark creature of the night character, right? And I guess maybe, the tone of the comic after this issue will take a slightly more super heroic kind of bent, I feel like. And McFarlane will move away from kind of the horror aspects of Spawn a little bit, and then eventually move full force back into that stuff, the hell and the creatures and the demons and the monsters. But there's kind of a pass here where Spawn, maybe from this issue on, is kind of veering more towards the superhero tropes and superhero comics overall, even in the coloring, right? It's just, you can tell, I feel with this issue, there's a shift with like just brighter colors and less emphasis on dark and brooding, I guess is how I'd put it. Seems like Spawn's on more of an action adventure here. And basically what he does is he shows up, it's described here, I guess I'll read it. Or maybe he just shows the enemy the putrid content of his own soul. Psychological warfare, the first step in creating the situation. The battle will be fought here. The war will end here. All creeps will die. They're called the creeps, right? And soon at the nerd camp, the war will end. The alleys will be your grave. The alley will be your grave. All nerds will die tonight at midnight. Face us now or cower and cringe until we hunt you down. So the creeps and the nerds are going to face each other. That's what we get here. Pretty cool panel here. Kind of reminds me of The Warriors a little bit. You know, it's got a bit of that vibe there. I know Frank Miller likes that movie and he's taken a lot of stuff from it in his comics. So I could, you know, when I review more of his stuff, I'll point that out too. And again, Todd McFarlane taking the easy way out on one whole page. You know, the easy way out for the storytelling where everything's happening off panel and we just get, you know, one or two guys kind of flying over here. So it's almost as if like all the action's happening off to the side here and we're just getting little bits and bobs of it here. And this is an infamous page if you pay attention because I guess maybe Todd was in a bit of a jam deadline wise. So you can see on this page a lot of the bodies if you really pay attention. I feel like this one's been inked by Rob Liefeld. This one's been inked by Jim Lee. There's some Eric Larson ones too. This is definitely Rob Liefeld here. Possibly him as well. Maybe Jim Lee. I'm trying to spot here. This one I can see the telltale lines and signs of Eric Larson. Jim Lee again, pretty sure. So if you have this comic at home, go through it, and you can tell from the general aesthetic of the character, and the look of the feels like McFarlane drew some very just basic figures where they were going to be. And, Rob Liefeld, Jim Lee came in and added those kind of technological details and look and stuff based on what they saw with the characters on previous pages, right? Got a girl here, definitely inked by Jim Lee. It's interesting. Aesthetically right away, you can it already looks a little bit different, right? Like the big guy here is inked by Tom McFarlane for sure. But, already the characters around them have a slightly different aesthetic. It still works together as a whole, I think. It's pretty... storytelling wise, you don't really, you get what you're supposed to get. Oh, a bunch of bodies and legs and stuff all around. It's a pretty gruesome shot, actually, once I realize it. Pretty gruesome. And this is an interesting trick Spawn does. So he actually teleports inside of this guy and just kind of pops out of him. I mean, that's pretty gory and gruesome. Pretty interesting. I'm not quite sure what I think of McFarlane's approach here. It works on some levels and maybe not so much on others. I feel like maybe he's doing a little bit of a Frank Miller riff maybe on this image here, right? With some of the rendering and the blood and stuff and just texturally. What I feel, I guess, is there could have been more, there's a bit of intestine here and there's like a bit of ribs here from what I can tell, but there could have just been a lot more innards and stuff kind of flying out. You got Spawn moving towards us in the foreground. Why not have some guts and intestines and maybe his heart or something like, coming forward? It's kind of a missed opportunity. It's not bad, but it could have been better. I feel like something, some images and fists of the North Star could kick this one's ass. And boom, just a simple shot finishing up this issue with Spawn throwing the head away. And we are promised next who killed Spawn. We are going to find out. Of course not today, but when I do that review for next week. And that's about it. That's interesting in this one here to talk about anyways. So there you go, guys. That's my review of Spawn number 11. If you are subscribing or still watching videos, thank you so much for your support. I really appreciate it. If you're watching but you're not subscribed, please do so below. It only takes a quick second for you. Helps the channel, helps us grow, helps get us out there to other people who are into comic books. So again, everyone out there, thank you so much for watching and have an awesome day.
Like, subscribe, like, subscribe.
King Comics presents Big Baby, Volume 1, Issues 1 to 13, 204 pages of story and art. King Comics also presents Star Crasher one-shot, 32 pages, cosmic sci-fi surrealist adventure. You can find these fine comics at KINGCOMICS.CA, at MaximusRex13 on Instagram, or on Facebook, MaxRex or Big Baby.